Eric Dorward here with the Spartan Rocketry Club, continuing my build of the Rocketarium Gadfly. This is a clustered build that I've basically just started. It is time to continue the process of getting everything together before the actual assembly part. So one thing I should note, I ended up putting, it's not quite dry yet, but I ended up putting a fillet in between the various motor mounts here. Just because I wanted a little bit of extra strength. In reading through the instructions again, it did suggest that you are supposed to glue them together and then glue them onto the bulkhead here, which I still don't know why you'd want to do that. I'm very content with the way I did things, and then putting a fillet on afterwards, but having that extra fillet I think ought to make things a little bit more robust. I'm not really concerned about this, honestly, because in order for this to have negative consequences for the motors, they'd have to try to be moving laterally, and that hopefully won't come up. They should be pretty well squeezed into the motor, or into the rocket body tube once we get this in there anyway, so I'm not terribly concerned about that. If you want to follow the instructions to the letter, then yeah, you probably should have not done what I did, but whatever. So, I'll put that like that. That still needs to dry a little bit. The next thing that I need to do is take care of the fins. Now, the fins are already cut, which has some, pluses and it has some minuses. One nice thing is that you don't have to cut anything out, even to get rid of the little burrs like in your average Estes kit. So that's nice. So they're a little bit more precise, perhaps. The only thing that I would suggest you do is still, grab them together like this. Grab a piece of sandpaper, and then just make sure that you have everything nice and uniform. Now I'm only going to do that on 3 out of the 4 faces, because the last one we're going to put, well, we're not going to round it. What we're going to do instead is we're going to put, well, you can have a look at the instructions. We're going to put a kind of 45-degree angle into it, which is, I don't know, it's easier, I guess, than rounding it, maybe. I'm not really sure. I think this is mostly for the aesthetic of the kit rather than anything else, though. So, I mean, if you want to round it, you go right ahead. The big drawback to this is that, actually, I don't want this, is that you need to sand these. They have not been sanded. They're pretty smooth, but you do need to sand the faces. Now, I've actually already sanded the big ones, but the basic gist is, you have to hold it like this and then just sand. So, while you can, typically, with an Estes kit that's just one big sheet of balsa, you can sand them all at once. This you're going to have to sand them individually, which is going to take a bit more time. It is kind of annoying, too. With the smaller guys, though, yeah, the smaller ones, you could try to sand them this way. What I ended up doing for most of these was I just broke out my sanding block and ran it over them like this. That's good enough. I don't think you're going to get a particularly good smooth finish on this, honestly, but this is pretty nice balsa. It didn't have a lot of nastiness to begin with, so you don't really need to take much off. And the finishing process is going to take care of any of the big irregularities anyway. So this is fine. It's not, I don't know, it's not what I would choose to do, but it works reasonably well. Now, as for getting that 45-degree angle in, I've done one already. Hold it up, I guess. How's that? You can see a little bit of the angle. I did take a few passes at this. It's looking down this direction. I don't know if you can see it, how well you can see that, but this wasn't so bad. The other ones I've done, they were a bit more annoying just because they're bigger and harder to hold. But short version is break out, I have a big old piece of sandpaper here that I only really use for this kind of purpose, and the sanding like that. And I'm just going to try to hold this fin at about a 45-degree angle. and then try to be, very consistent about going back and forth. And let's see how, I don't know how well you can see that, but I've put an angle into it. It's not quite right. My right side here, I've sanded a bit more than the left side, so it's the middle point, where the two pieces come together, isn't quite in the right spot. So this side needs a little bit more, but I mean, it's passable. Now apparently I'm only doing this to the leading edge, so I'm not going to round anything else. Okay, it took me about 12 backs and forths here to do the first one, so I'm just going to assume that that's going to be pretty consistent. Turns out that was actually kind of unbalanced. So, oops. I do need to straighten this one out a little bit. Now if you find that it's not coming together just quite right, a couple passes ought to smooth or straighten things out. Just sand the side that is off. Right, so passable. Do one more. The big ones, I did one of them. As I said, that one was more annoying. This is really easy to hold. And I think, the trick to this is being consistent. If you are consistent in the back and forth motion that you use, you should end up with, around a 45-degree angle sanded into it. Holding the other ones, though, I found this to be more difficult, just because it's big, it's like holding a pencil. So getting it just right and then repeating the motion. I'll try about 10 passes. So this one wasn't too bad. The other direction I found to be somewhat of a challenge. Because it feels kind of unnatural. So the other thing too is that the point, I had some trouble with the point because it kind of deteriorated, it kind of fell apart. This one is falling apart a little bit too. It's not balanced like at all, at least in the back. So we'll sand that down a little bit, and now this side needs a little bit of adjustment. Front looks alright, back is adequate. So I was just pleased to get these more or less accurate, or the first one anyway. So I will repeat the other two off camera because you don't really need to watch that. Once the fins are all prepped, we're closing in on the point where we can be ready for construction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two more things in this video. One is I'm going to draw the lines, at least set that part up. So we've got the very typical line mark diagram here. This is pretty much the same as, you've probably done this many times if you have built rockets on your own, because this is pretty classic right here. So out that comes. I will point out too that there's absolutely nothing on the back of this. So the good people at Rocketarium were pretty conscientious about printing this so that you weren't going to end up cutting through instructions that you might actually need down the road. Anyway, there's that. I need some tape, and I need the body tube. Oops, let's knock stuff down off camera. That's lovely. I do need, there are two body tubes in this. I need the bigger one. Not surprisingly, right, because this is a lot of fin, right? It's certainly not going to fit on the other one. So let's get a little bit of tape. Well, I'm probably going to end up, I'm going to tape right over those lines. That's kind of a bummer, because those are the alignment points this. That'll work. Wrap it around, and hopefully you did a good job. And yeah, the alignment points, well, it's pretty close. Even if you didn't get it on perfectly straight, you can flex this enough so that it shouldn't matter all that much. There we go. Alright, and then break out the pencil at all those arrows. You're going to put a little mark. Should really sharpen this pencil. And then make sure you do it down at the other end too. This is how you make sure that you are aligned properly. Your line ought to go through both marks, right? Not just one or the other. There we go. Okay, don't need this anymore. Okay, now one of these is the launch lug, and the instructions usually suggest that you mark it off as such. I usually don't bother because all of them are evenly spaced except for the launch lug, but you know, you can always draw yourself a little L there just to remind you that that is indeed the launch lug, and that you should probably glue the launch lug on that line and not any of the others. So that's easy enough. Just as a bit of, it's worth mentioning, this is a fairly glossy tube. The instructions suggest that you sand before you attach the launch lug, like just where you're going to attach, well, not just the launch lug, but really everything, the fins and the launch lug, to get down, you know, to get the shiny bit off, because the glue is going to bind better to the cardboard underneath than to the whatever the shiny stuff is made out of. I don't think I'm going to bother doing that. I've never had any real problems with this, but it is an idea. You know, if you are having trouble getting things to stick properly, that might be part of it. So something to consider. I'm not really concerned about it for this particular kit because this is a lot of surface area and this is very small. So I'm not terribly concerned with these things falling over. Although now that I said that, I'm sure that I will have a devil of a time trying to get this thing together, but that's on me because I kind of jinxed it. So there we go. One last thing that we're going to do here quickly, just because it's a nice thing to get done, is we're going to break out the nose cone and we're going to weight it. So here is, this is a big old block of clay, or plasticine apparently. No idea what plasticine was, but apparently this is plasticine. I would have just called it clay, but apparently it's not. This is a lot. Like, no kidding, that's a lot. And this nose cone is surprisingly heavy. It is a pretty thick plastic, I suppose. I can't, well, I don't know. It's surprisingly thick. It looks like it's at least like 1/8 of an inch thick right where this hole is. Because we have so much fin surface area high up the rocket, we're going to need some nose cone weight. Otherwise, you will have a fundamentally unstable rocket, and that's always a bad idea. We like stable things, not unstable things. So the instructions, actually, they typically, you know, you cut this up and you make it into snakes. This actually suggests that you make pea-sized balls and chuck them down the nose cone. You could. I don't know. I'm just kind of used to making snakes, so I think I'm going to stick with that. This is, again, this is a lot. You know, it's basically, it's going to at least double the weight of the nose cone, which was surprisingly heavy to begin with. So I'm going to break out my knife here, and I'm just going to chop this up into manageable chunks. Yep. There we go. Clean my blade off here. Just be careful, of course, it's a blade, it's sharp. I've got like 8 layers of paper towel here between it and my hand. If it were any less than that, I would not feel comfortable. That apparently needs to go someplace safe, so back in the box. And then, I'm not going to do all these on camera because that doesn't sound very exciting, but I'm going to, you know, preschool snake this. Whoops, and that tore. Doesn't matter. It's supposed to be down in pea-sized balls anyway, according to the instructions, so you know, whatever. All it really needs to do is fit in the hole. Fits in the hole. That fits in the hole too. a couple of these. I guess I can get in. I'll do a few. Do not skip this step. As counterintuitive as it seems, we do want weight in there. The weight is essential. It is not optional. The weight is necessary to keep the rocket stable, because you'd think, oh, well, there's a ton of fins, it should be really stable. Well, that's not actually how the rocket works. Rockets generally look like arrows, right? And they look that way for a reason. It's not just, oh, well, it seemed like a good idea because people were making arrows for thousands of years, so now that we're new to this, let's make our new tool look like our old tool. No, arrows look like that for a reason too. The fletching is there for stability. This is this balta stick that I had was not particularly strong. I'm going to switch over to my other one here. You want this as jammed into the nose cone as possible. So, this isn't all the weight, but it's some of the weight, and I think this is a good place to, take care of business, because if I have all that in there, it's going to be really hard to get it where I want it. So knowing exactly where it is kind of difficult, but you can actually see the shadow of the clay, plasticine, whatever, and your stick if you are in a room that is illuminated well enough, which this one is at the moment. You can also, of course, just look down the tube from time to time, which is certainly an option as well. But I can see actually that this is not all the way down in the nose cone. It's most of the way down in the nose cone. So I'm going to take a moment to just push it. Now, I'm kind of taking a risk here because, well, to some degree, a risk. The previous piece of balsa that I was using, like I said, did not feel like it would be up for this task. And I really don't want to break off the stick in the clay because I'd have a devil of a time getting it back. There are plenty of other things you could use other than a piece of balsa scrap in order to do this. I've used, for some of them, I've actually used my launch rod because the nose cone was so long that I didn't have any balsa scrap that would reach far enough. So the only particularly long piece of metal that was narrow enough that would make it all that way was my launch rod. So it worked just fine. Alright. I think, looking at, I doubt you can see it. I can't see it anymore either. It only seems to, it's backlit. I can see where everything is, but just holding it up, that's just not going to happen. So I'm pretty sure I have this about as far into the nose cone, front of the nose cone, as it's likely to get. I don't know what you can see down there. It's not too bad. You can see it's pretty well rammed in. So that's like a third of it, less than a third of it, maybe a quarter, like a quarter of it. I'm going to repeat the process. Probably not worth watching. Anyway, so that takes care of most of the pre-gluing phase anyway. What I'm going to do off camera between now and the next video is I'm going to take the body tube and I'm going to extend all those lines using the door jam trick. So that'll happen next, and then we'll see what we do next. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.